Just stay in the kitchen for a little while. Mama, please, their English is very fast, and you know your accent. My son, my Alejandro, couldn't even look at me as he said it. The words, spoken in a hushed, urgent whisper, were sharper than any knife. He wasn't protecting me, he was hiding me. He was ashamed of me, ashamed of the accent woven from the same thread as the lullabies I sang to him as a child. Ashamed of the hands that had scrubbed floors and cooked in kitchens just like this one so he could wear tailored suits. A cold dread settled in my chest. This house, bought with the money he earned from the education I bled for, suddenly felt like a prison, and I, its secret prisoner. The silence after the last guest left was not an absence of sound, but a physical presence, thick and suffocating. It was broken only by the sharp, retreating click of Alejandro's dress shoes on the polished marble floor as he ascended the staircase. His fiancée's arm linked tightly with his heart. He didn't look back. He didn't utter a single word. The space where he had been standing seemed to warp with the coldness of his departure. A void that sucked all the warmth from the cavernous room. I was left alone in the vast, gleaming kitchen, a space that had felt like a temporary sanctuary but now felt like a cage of my own making. I stumbled toward a small, utilitarian stool tucked in the corner and sank onto it. The dam I had so carefully constructed all evening finally shattered. A sob ripped from my throat, raw and ugly, echoing in the sterile emptiness. The tears were hot and relentless, carving paths through the makeup I'd applied with such nervous hope. They weren't just tears of humiliation. This was a deeper, more profound grief, the crushing weight of 1,000 yesterdays rising up at once to collapse upon me. I had poured the very substance of my soul into that boy. I had crossed a desert of uncertainty, with his name as my only compass. I had scrubbed floors until my knees were raw so he could hold his head high in rooms like this one. And now, in this palace he had built for his new life, I was a relic, a piece of embarrassing furniture to be hidden away when important company came over. The thought was a physical pain, a fist clenching around my heart. That night, curled on the unforgiving mattress in the guest room that smelled of lavender, potpourri, and detachment, I hit the lowest point of my life. The darkness behind my eyelids was not peaceful. It was a swirling vortex of every fear I'd ever suppressed. I was utterly alone. More alone than I had been on my first night in this country, clutching a single suitcase in a bleak boarding house. Then, I had the fuel of a fierce, maternal dream. Now, the dream had curdled, leaving only the ashes of what was. I thought of my own mother, her face lined from sun and worry, her hands so similar to mine, always busy. She would sing to me in our dialect, songs about the land and the river that ran behind our village. I had tried to sing those same songs to a young Alejandro, but he'd put his small hands over his ears. "Not that, Mama," he'd say, his English already cleaner, sharper than mine. "Sing the one from the TV." I had complied, my voice stumbling over the unfamiliar English lyrics, another small piece of myself shelved away for his comfort. The memory morphed into the day he introduced me to his then-girlfriend, now his fiancée. We were at a cafe, and I had practiced my greeting for days. "It is so nice to meet you," I'd said, my tongue feeling thick and clumsy. He had winced, just a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker in his eye, but I saw it. Later, on the phone he said, "Mother, it's nice to meet you. You don't need to say so. It sounds desperate." That single, corrected syllable had felt like a door closing, the lock clicking into place. Lying there in the dark, a strange clarity began to pierce the suffocating despair. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was a path we had been walking for years, a path I had helped pave with my own silence. In my desperate desire for his happiness, I had taught him that my place was in the shadows, that my love was unconditional, but my presence was conditional on his comfort. As the first gray light of dawn began to bleed through the window, my tears finally dried up, leaving a strange, hollowed-out calm in their wake. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was no longer a chaotic storm. It was a cold, hard fact. The woman who had crossed the border with nothing but hope was still in here, somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the heartbreak. She had survived worse than a party. She had survived loss and hunger and the profound loneliness of building a life from scratch. Alejandro had tried to make me invisible, to erase the waters he came from. But as I pushed myself up from the bed, my body aching but my spine straight, a new, defiant thought began to form. I was the water, and you cannot lock away the ocean. Days later, the silence in Alejandro's house had become oppressive. My instructions were unspoken but clear. Make myself smaller, less visible. I was in the guest room, my asterisk room, now packing away my own history into cardboard boxes, trying to shrink my existence to a manageable size. It was a form of self-erasure, a quiet capitulation to his unspoken demands. Then, my fingers, dusted with the fine powder of my own resignation, brushed against something solid and unfamiliar at the back of the highest shelf in the closet. I had to stand on my toes, my muscles protesting, to pull it free. It was a small, locked wooden box, its dark stain faded to a dull gray in patches, the carved floral motifs worn smooth by time. I hadn't held it, hadn't even thought of it, in over 30 years. A fine layer of dust, the accumulation of a lifetime, lived in shadows, coated my fingertips. I stared at it. This stubborn relic of a past I had willingly entombed. The key was long gone, lost in some move, or perhaps deliberately discarded. But the lock was old and flimsy, a symbolic gesture more than a real barrier. A hard, sharp twist of a letter opener I found in Alejandro's stuja, tool for his important modern work hand. The clasp gave way with a splintering crack that echoed like a gunshot in the hushed room. The scent that rose from the opened lid was a ghost in itself, the faint, sweet smell of aged paper, dried ink, and a forgotten, colder climate. On top, resting on a bed of yellowed tissue, were photographs. My parents, their faces stern yet proud, standing before our modest home. Myself, younger, my hair cut in a severe, practical style, my eyes holding a directness that felt alien to me now. I was not smiling in the picture, I was assessing, thinking. Beneath the photographs lay the true skeleton of my former life. There were my old credentials, the laminated cards stiff and brittle. The photograph showed a woman with a sharp gaze, her name, my real name, Valentina printed in bold letters beneath the title, *lead forensic accountant, special government task force*. The words felt like a incantation from another world. Next to it were newspaper clippings, their edges fragile as butterfly wings. The headlines, in my native language, were stark and triumphant. Task Force breaks syndicate with paper trail. The woman who followed the money. One article featured a picture of me standing beside the chief of police, accepting a handshake. My back was straight, my chin lifted. I looked formidable. And then, at the very bottom, cool and heavy against the cardboard base, was the medal. It was ornate, a disc of bronze and enamel hanging from a striped ribbon. It was weighty, substantial, in a way that nothing in my life had been for decades. The heft of it was an anchor, pulling me back into a body I had long since abandoned. My breath caught. The memories didn't trickle back. They flooded, a dam breaking behind my eyes. I remembered the long, silent nights hunched over spreadsheets and bank ledgers. The thrill of finding the one inconsistent digit in a sea of numbers, the single thread that, when pulled, would make an entire empire of corruption unravel. I remembered the cold fear that would sometimes grip my throat when a case involved dangerous men, a fear I had learned to transmute into fuel, making my mind sharper, my focus more intense. I was celebrated, respected. I was not a mother pleading for a son's approval. I was a hunter, and my prey was the truth hidden in columns of deceit. Seeing the metal, feeling its cool, unyielding weight in my palm, was like being reintroduced to a stranger I had once known intimately. This woman, Valentina, was not desperate. She was not an accent to be corrected or a presence to be minimized. She was a force. She had been fearless. The hollowed-out calm I had felt at dawn solidified into a cold, crystalline fury, not at Alejandro, but at myself. Seeing the metal, feeling its weight in my palm, was like being reintroduced to a stranger I had once known intimately, Valentina. She was not desperate, not an accent to be corrected, or a presence to be minimized. She was a force. I had buried that woman, teaching Alejandro through my own actions that her light was too harsh, her history too foreign for his new, polished world. I had traded my mettle for motherhood, my credentials for his comfort, and in doing so, I had created the very man who would now wince at an extra syllable of love. I closed my fingers around the metal. The metal grew warm from my grip. The ghost in the photographs was no longer a ghost. She was a blueprint. Alejandro had tried to make the water forget it was the ocean. But the ocean has a memory of its own, a deep, relentless pull, and it was time for the tide to turn. The memory was like a jolt of electricity. The hurt didn't disappear, but it morphed into a cold, hard resolve. I had spent decades making myself small for my son's comfort. That woman in the box, the investigator, would never have stood for it. My son and his new family valued wealth and power above all else. I would use their own language to teach them a lesson in respect. The first step was reconnaissance. I slipped the metal, its ribbon now a faded, defiant stripe of color, into my pocket. It was no longer a relic, it was a whetstone. I walked out of the guest room, my posture different, my spine remembering a forgotten alignment. The house was a monument to curated perfection, every surface gleaming, every object positioned for maximum aesthetic impact. It was also, I now understood, a fortress of data. In the living room, Alejandro was on his laptop, his brow furrowed in concentration. Sarah was arranging a massive bouquet of white orchids, her movements precise and airy. They were the picture of effortless success. They didn't see a threat in the quiet woman padding across their imported silk rug. "The garden is so lovely," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I think I'll get some air before the rehearsal dinner. I want to see if I need a sweater." Until now. I took the tablet and retreated to a wrought iron bench in the garden. Now, the air felt different. I opened the browser. My fingers, which had fumbled with my phone's settings, now moved with an old, fluid certainty. I didn't check the weather. I opened a private tab and began to type. Sarah's father, Charles, was a name I'd heard with reverence. "Papa Charles built an empire from nothing," Sarah would say. I started there. Charles Whitlock, Whitmore Industries. A few quick searches in the public domain revealed the standard corporate puffery, philanthropic endeavors, press releases about sustainable growth, a glossy, impenetrable facade. But empires, especially those built from nothing, always have cracks. They have suppliers who get squeezed, competitors who mysteriously falter, zoning laws that change overnight. I remembered the language. I typed in a series of terms not meant for a search bar, but for the dark, interconnected web of business registries and legal filings. Whitmore Industries, plus OSHA dispute plus settlement. Charles Whitlock plus former partner plus lawsuit. Seafront Properties LLC plus Whitmore Shell Company. This was the sea of numbers. Each legal case, each disputed transaction was a thread. I just had to find the loose one. And then I saw it. A dismissed lawsuit from 3 years ago brought by a small family-owned packaging company that had been Whitmore's primary supplier for decades. The suit alleged Whitmore had abruptly terminated their contract using a morality clause, citing a minor environmental compliance issue that had been promptly rectified. The small company claimed it was a pretext, that Whitmore was deliberately forcing them into bankruptcy to acquire their land, which had skyrocketed in value due to a new transit line. The case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. But the plaintiff's lawyer was a name I knew, Mateo Flores. We had worked 2 cases together in Buenos Aires a lifetime ago. He was a bulldog, tenacious and brilliant. He wouldn't have taken that case, let alone let it get to a filing, without smelling blood in the water. I closed the browser, erased the history, and sat back. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the manicured lawn. The rehearsal dinner was in 2 hours. A performance was about to begin, but I was no longer just a member of the audience. I had my thread. I walked back inside, placed the tablet on the counter, and gave my son a soft, grateful smile. Thank you, asterisk, MIJO asterisk. It's a bit chilly. I'll wear my shawl. And while they celebrated their union, I would be in the archives of my own mind. Quietly, methodically, preparing the demolition of their empire, the chill of the library was a welcome reprieve from the stifling, air-conditioned perfection of the Thorne estate. Here, amidst the scent of old paper and industrial cleaner, I was invisible. Just another senior citizen killing time, my face illuminated by the cool blue glow of a public computer terminal. My fingers, once adept at navigating the complex ledgers of Buenos Aires, now danced across the cheap keyboard, relearning the rhythm of the hunt. My initial forays into Marcus Thorne's public financials were a study in bland respectability. Thorne Capital was a sleek, impenetrable fortress on the surface. But fortresses, I had learned long ago, are not brought down by a single battering ram, but by the slow, patient erosion of their foundations. I started with the small, seemingly insignificant cracks. A charitable foundation that reported suspiciously low administrative costs. A series of LLCs with opaque geographical names, Bayside Holdings, Mountain Vista Ventures, that appeared to do nothing but hold assets. The money flowed between them in a lazy, circular dance, a choreography designed to confuse and obfuscate. My English may have been accented, but my mind was as sharp as ever. I listened, I observed. During the rare moments I was allowed around his fiancée's family, I feigned a lack of understanding, letting them speak freely about their business, their creative accounting, and their powerful connections. At a pre-wedding brunch, Marcus himself had clapped my son on the back, his voice a booming, confident thing. "It's all about velocity, son," he'd said, as if explaining the universe to a child. "Keep the capital moving so fast, no one can get a good look at it. Stagnant money is dead money." He'd meant it as a pearl of wisdom. To me, it was a confession. At night, using the cheap laptop and public Wi-Fi at the library, I started digging deeper into the finances of my son's father-in-law. My old skills came back to me like a forgotten melody, a song of numbers and patterns I thought I'd buried with my old life. I started noticing patterns, inconsistencies, the telltale signs of a carefully constructed house of cards. The ghost of Mateo Flores's failed lawsuit was my Rosetta Stone, that small packaging company driven to bankruptcy. I cross-referenced its location with the LLCs in Thorne's orbit. Bayside Holdings had purchased the land at a foreclosure auction mere weeks after the lawsuit was dismissed. The profit was staggering. But it wasn't just about one parcel of land. It was a pattern. I found 2 other small businesses, a local printer and a textile importer, who had suffered similar fate: sudden contract terminations over minor infractions, followed by aggressive acquisition of their assets by one of Thorne's shell companies. The method was brutal in its efficiency. Use a minor compliance issue as a legal cudgel, force a cash flow crisis, then swoop in as the savior or the liquidator. They weren't just building an empire. They were strip-mining the livelihoods of those who lacked the resources to fight back. I thought of my son, his face so full of earnest love for Eliza. Did he see it? The casual cruelty that underpinned the wealth he was marrying into. Or was he, like so many, blinded by the glittering surface? He saw a successful, self-made man. I saw a predator who wore a suit instead of fur. One evening, hunched over the laptop in the silent library, I found it. A tremor ran through me, so visceral I had to clasp my hands together to still them. It was a payment, a single, massive wire transfer from a Mountain Vista Ventures to a corporate entity registered in the Cayman Islands. The amount was eye-watering, but it was the date that made my blood run cold. It was 3 days after the city council had announced the route for the new transit line, the same transit line that had made the packaging company's land so valuable. It was a payoff. It had to be. Someone on the inside had been tipped off, and Thorne had paid for that information, allowing him to strategically target the company for acquisition before the public announcement sent property values soaring. This was no longer just a suspicion, it was evidence. Flimsy, circumstantial, but evidence nonetheless. I was no longer just pulling a thread. I was holding the very string that, if pulled hard enough, could unravel the entire tapestry of lies. The wedding was tomorrow. The rehearsal dinner had been a nauseating spectacle of toasts to legacy and future. I had smiled my serene, motherly smile. Now, back in my guest room, I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The face that stared back was lined with age, but the eyes were the same ones that had stared down corrupt officials. They were the eyes of a woman who knew how to read the balance sheet of a human soul, and who had just found a devastating entry in the ledger of Marcus Thorne. The encrypted message from Javier arrived just as the morning sun began to stain the sky, a soft, bruised purple. I was already awake, had been for hours, the ornate guest room, feeling more and more like a gilded cage. The soft ping from my secure burner phone was a lifeline thrown into the silence. The file he'd sent was dense, a labyrinth of shell companies with innocuous, forgettable names: Bepix Holdings, Bryn Mawr Trust, Chimera Capital. They were scattered across jurisdictions known for their discretion. The Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, a post office box in Delaware. But Javier, brilliant, tenacious Javier, had connected the dots I couldn't. His accompanying message was terse. Follow the money. It all leads back to a single fund. The Polaris Growth Fund. The sole signatory is a lawyer named Alistair Finch. Look him up. He wasn't a celebrity lawyer. He was the kind who operated in the pre-dawn shadows, the architect of financial fortresses meant to be impregnable, and he was. According to a buried professional profile, Javier had also dug up the outside legal counsel for the city's transit authority until 2 years ago. The timeline was perfect. He would have had intimate knowledge of the proposed transit line routes, the internal debates, the precise parcels of land that were about to become gold mines. He was the leak. He was the one who had sold the information to Thorne. A cold, sharp clarity settled over me. This was no longer a theory, it was a map. I had the source of the tip and the beneficiary of the crime. All I needed now was the undeniable link, the single piece of evidence that would place Thorne and Finch in the same room at the same time, discussing their scheme. A meeting, an email, a transfer that wasn't so carefully laundered. Something that would turn my circumstantial web into a steel trap. The scent of lilies and expensive coffee seeped under my door. The first signs of the wedding day's carefully orchestrated chaos. I could hear the distant, muffled sounds of staff arranging floral arches and the string quartet beginning their rehearsal in the grand hall. The performance of a lifetime was beginning, and I had a starring role to play. I dressed with deliberate, calm movements, choosing a simple, elegant sheath dress in a forgiving shade of lavender. I looked like a mother of the bride. I looked harmless. The saint's medal, cool and solid, went into a small velvet pouch that I pinned inside my dress, against my heart. It was my armor. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the same woman from the night before. The lines of age and anxiety still present, but there was a new light in those old eyes. The huntress was ready. The ceremony was a blur of white silk and solemn vows. I sat in the front pew, as planned, my face a masterpiece of serene joy. I dabbed at non-existent tears with a lace handkerchief. I squeezed my daughter's hand as she passed me on the arm of her beaming, oblivious father. And all the while, in the quiet, soundproofed archives of my mind, I was tearing down Marcus Thorne's world. He stood at the altar, a portrait of rugged success and devoted love. His gaze met mine once, and I gifted him with a small, tremulous smile, the very picture of a mother entrusting her most precious treasure to his care. He accepted it with a gracious nod, utterly blind to the demolition charges I was wiring to the foundations of his life. My plan crystallized during the homily. The wedding gifts, the sprawling, opulent ballroom where the reception was to be held, contained a mountain of them. Many in large, unwieldy boxers. Security would be tight at the entrances, but inside that room, amidst the chaos of waitstaff and celebrating guests, a single, harmless, elegantly dressed older woman could move with impunity. Thorne's private study was on the same floor, just down a long corridor. He would be occupied for hours with photographs, toasts, and dancing. It was the only window I would get. The reception began with a cascade of champagne and laughter. I played my part, circulating, accepting compliments on my daughter's beauty, nodding along to stories of the happy couple's future. I watched Thorne, studying his patterns. He was a gracious host, constantly moving, but he always returned to a central table. Holding court, he was in his element, the king of his castle. When the band struck up a lively swing number and the dance floor flooded, I saw my moment. Slipping away from a conversation about hydrangeas, I moved not toward the restrooms, but toward the hall of gifts. The room was a glittering cave of silver boxes and beribboned paper. I moved purposefully to the far side, where a stack of large, flat Boxiza painting, perhaps leaned against the wall near a service entrance. As I'd hoped, it was a blind spot, shielded from the main doorway. My heart was a piston in my chest, but my hands were steady. I unpinned the small velvet pouch from my dress. Inside, nestled next to the saint's medal, was the microdrive Javier had couriered to my hotel, a tiny, powerful thing no larger than my thumbnail. It contained every shred of evidence. The bank transfers, the corporate structures, the timeline, and a dossier on Alistair Finch. It was a bomb, and I was about to place it inside the enemy's walls. With a final, surreptitious glance, I slid the velvet pouch deep between the two largest gift boxes. It was safe, hidden, and utterly inaccessible to me now. The risk was immense, but so was the payoff. I wouldn't be carrying the evidence on me when I made my next move. I had just created a dead drop in the heart of his domain. I smoothed my dress, allowed a slightly confused, flustered expression to cross my face, and emerged back into the roaring energy of the reception. I had just passed the point of no return. The performance was over. The reckoning had begun. The first tremor was a whisper, not a shout. With Javier's remote, meticulous help, I'd gained a ghost's access to the labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell corporations Thorne used like a second skin. My first move was a subtle one, a single thread pulled from the grand tapestry of his corruption. I compiled a small, anonymous package of evidence detailing a minor, almost elegant instance of tax evasion by Thorne's Campania, few million funneled through a shell company in the Caymans, a rounding error for a man of his wealth. I sent it to Asterisk, the Ledger Asterisk, a niche financial blog known for its dogged, if underfunded, investigative journalism. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't a front-page sensation, but in the specific circles where such things mattered, it caused a distinct stir. The article was dry, filled with numbers and corporate registries. But the implication was clear. Someone was poking around in Thorne's private financial garden. The company's stock took a minor but noticeable hit. A few basis points, a flicker on a screen. For the public, it was a non-event. For Thorne's inner circle, it was a shockwave. Javier, monitoring their encrypted doors so they thought communications channels, reported a palpable shift in tone. The usual arrogant, bullish messages were replaced by terse, guarded inquiries. Where did this come from? Who talked? The atmosphere curdled from invincibility to paranoia. They were rattled, a nest of hornets poked with a single, precise stick. They had no idea where the attack had come from, and that was the most terrifying part for them. Their fortress, they were realizing, might have a crack. I watched it all from a distance. A ghost at the feast of their anxiety. I continued my charade at the office, playing the diligent, slightly overwhelmed new hire. I saw the effect firsthand. Mr. Thorne's geniality became tighter, more strained. His smiles were quicker to vanish, his eyes constantly scanning the room as if trying to spot the leak. Alistair Finch, his weasel of a CFO, became a nervous wreck. His hands constantly fidgeting with his cufflinks, his voice a half-octave higher than usual. They were looking for a traitor in their ranks, a disgruntled employee, a rival. They never once looked at me, the quiet woman in the corner taking notes, her face a mask of sympathetic concern. This small victory was a proof of concept. The machine could be gummed up, the giant could be made to stumble, but it wasn't enough. A minor tax story would be buried, explained away, forgotten. I needed to escalate. I needed to turn the whisper into a scream. It was time to use the dead drop. 2 days after the *ledger* article, I feigned a migraine and left the office early. My heart wasn't a piston this time, it was a slow, heavy drumbeat of finality. I took a circuitous route, my senses hyperalert, watching for tales that weren't there. I ended up at a public library across town in a dusty carrel, surrounded by the scent of old paper and quiet desperation. From my bag, I retrieved a cheap, prepaid burner phone, the kind you could buy with cash and discard without a trace. My fingers, slick with a cold sweat, dialed a number I had memorized but never written down. It rang once, twice, a voice answered, deep and calm. City desk. It's tucked between two large, flat boxes in the Hall of Gifts, from Alistair Thorne's wedding reception. It contains the full story, not a piece of it. All of it. You'll find the bodies, I used Javier's phrasing, the one that had haunted me, bodies. Soriano's voice lost its professional neutrality. There was a sharp, keen interest now, financial ones. And one very real one, her name was Lillian. My voice cracked on her name, the first genuine emotion to break through my controlled performance. I couldn't say more. The line went dead. I pulled the battery from the phone, my hands trembling now that the deed was done. I dropped the phone's pieces into separate trash bins on my way out, a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading nowhere. The wait was an agony. The next 24 hours were a blur of forced normalcy and internal chaos. I went to work, I smiled, I filed reports, all while feeling like my nerves were exposed wires, sparking with dread and anticipation. I watched Thorne, searching for any sign that he knew. He was more irritable, snapping at his assistant over a misplaced document, but there was no panic. Not yet. The bomb was placed. The fuse was lit. All that was left was the wait for the explosion. I had set the pieces in motion, from the subtle poison of the first leak to the tactical nuclear option of the dead drop. Thorne's world, which had seemed so impregnable from the outside, was now under attack from an enemy he didn't know and a weapon he had carelessly left in his own house. The performance was indeed over. The reckoning was no longer just beginning. It was hurtling toward him, and I was standing in the eye of the coming storm, ready to watch his kingdom burn. The arrogance of Marcus Thorne and my son was astounding. They dismissed the leak as a random attack from a business rival, and in my presence, their paranoia curdled into a brittle, boastful performance, all sharp edges and forced laughter. I was the ghost in the machine of their lives, polishing the silver they used to celebrate their own cleverness. The tension in the house was a physical presence, a thick electric haze that made the air difficult to breathe. Thorne's irritability had morphed into a cold, focused fury. He stalked the halls like a caged tiger, his phone permanently glued to his hand. Alondro mirrored his father's posture, his youthful face set in a scowl that was meant to look formidable, but only succeeded in making Kim look like a petulant child playing at being a king. It all culminated during a tense family dinner. The table was a sprawling expanse of polished mahogany, set with bone china and crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier overhead. Alina, Alejandro's mother, picked at her food, her eyes distant. I moved around them, a silent specter refilling water glasses, clearing plates. I was part of the scenery, as noticeable and noteworthy as the wallpaper. That's when Marcus's phone rang. He answered it with a sharp Thorn. He listened for a moment, and then a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated contempt. No, no, it's fine, he said into the receiver, his voice a low, confident rumble. Let them dig. They're chasing their own tails. The initial leak was clumsy, an amateur's attempt, probably Sterling from Ethelred Holdings, the poor bastard. He laughed then, a sound that had no joy in it, only the cold glee of a predator toying with its prey. He thinks he's found a chink in the armor. Little does he know, the armor is just for show. Emboldened by his own sense of invincibility, he decided to boast. He looked right at Alejandro, his eyes gleaming with malicious pride. Listen to this, son, he said. Loud enough for me, the help, the very walls to hear. This is how you stay 3 steps ahead. I'm moving the final tranche now. A series of 3 transfers through the Cayman holding, then to the Shell in Luxembourg, and finally, it all settles with our friends at Perseus Holdings. Untraceable, a ghost trail. By the time anyone even thinks to look at Perseus, the money will be gone, and the merger with Omnicorp will be irreversible. We'll own them. He saw a maid, a simpleton, a piece of the furniture he owned. He winked at Alejandro, a grotesque, conspiratorial gesture, as if to say, she doesn't understand a thing. None of them do. In that single, arrogant wink, Marcus Thorn had signed his own indictment and handed me the pen. I finished my work and retreated to the kitchen, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The bomb had not only been placed, he had just personally confirmed its location and timer. The fuse was burning shorter, faster. I leaned against the cool stainless steel of the refrigerator, the hum of its motor, the only sound in my roaring silence. I thought of Lillian, not as a ghost, but as the vibrant, clever woman she had been. I pictured her laughter, her sharp mind, the way she would have relished this moment of poetic justice. Thorn wasn't just moving money, he was laying out his own crime scene for the authorities, drawing them a map with a neon sign that read, "Guilty." Thorn's phone rang earlier than usual. His greeting was less a word and more a grunt. The silence from his study that followed was profound, a vacuum that sucked all the sound from the house. I was cleaning the upstairs landing, the feather duster in my hand, feeling as heavy as a weapon. The door to his study flew open with such force it slammed against the wall. Thorn stood there, his face a terrifying shade of pale. The carefully constructed mask of the corporate titan was gone, replaced by the raw, unvarnished face of a cornered animal. His eyes were wide, darting, not seeing anything in the hall. "Alejandro," he bellowed, his voice cracking, "get in here, now." But not before I heard the raw, panicked words that hissed from his lips. A secret too big to be contained by oaken privilege. They know about Perseus. I allowed myself one slow, deliberate breath, the scent of lemon polish and old wood filling my lungs before I resumed my dusting. Every movement was measured, a pantomime of normalcy performed for an audience of one myself. The feather duster glided over the banister, a whisper against the roaring silence from Thorn's study. I didn't need to press my ear to the door to know what was happening inside. I could imagine it all. Thorn, his composure shattered, pacing like a caged tiger. Alejandro bewildered and scared, being grilled about his contacts, his digital footprint, every careless word he might have uttered at a party. Thorn would be looking for a leak, a weak link in his own chain. Never suspecting the ghost in the walls, the woman polishing the silver he would soon use to toast his own destruction. Later that day, in the sterile, flickering light of the parking garage, I immediately relayed the information to Javier. "The panic has started," I said, my voice low and steady. "He knows they're on to Perseus." Javier let out a low whistle, the sound bouncing off the concrete pillars. "That's the final piece of the puzzle." Then, confirmation from the lion's mouth itself. The merger is their endgame, a massive fraud that will bankrupt thousands of smaller investors while they sail away on a golden parachute. The shell companies, the doctored financial forecasts, the secret transfers, all of it, pointed to a single, spectacular heist disguised as a corporate merger. Javier, with his nimble fingers and righteous anger, helped me prepare a comprehensive file of evidence that was undeniable and explosive. It wasn't just numbers on a screen, it was a narrative, a story of greed so vast it threatened to swallow a city whole. We wove in the audio files, my whispered confirmations of Thorne's panicked phone calls. The date-stamped proof that tied the digital phantoms to the man in the penthouse. We need to deliver this masterpiece somewhere, they'll never see it coming, Javier murmured, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop. Somewhere they feel safe, invincible. It was Thorne's night of nights, a grotesque carnival of self-congratulation where the city's elite gathered to anoint him as their king. The press would be there in droves. The cameras would be rolling. It was the night he would announce the Perseus merger to the world, positioning it as his magnanimous gift to the financial markets. The gala, I said, the words tasting like ash and victory. We set the trap for then. The gala was a fortress of security and social scrutiny, but I knew its secrets. I knew the service entrance where the floral arrangements arrived, the path the kitchen staff used to take out the trash, the small windowless office off the main ballroom where the event coordinator would inevitably hide for a moment of silence. That would be the drop point. I would place the evidence there, a digital ghost containing Thorne's ruin, and Javier would ensure it found its way to a specific, incorruptible financial reporter who would be in attendance. In the days that followed, the house became a pressure cooker. Thorne's fear curdled into a cold, sharp paranoia. He fired his personal assistant over a misplaced decimal point in a memo. He had the entire IT team voluntarily re-interviewed by a private security firm. He watched everyone, his eyes lingering on his own son, with a scrutiny that was painful to witness. Alejandro moved through the rooms like a shadow, his usual arrogance replaced by a nervous tension. He knew a storm was coming, he just didn't know it was brewing inside the house. The night of the gala arrived, draped in a false serenity. I helped Lillian's mother, Eleanor, with her emerald necklace, my fingers steady on the cold clasp. She was flustered, excited, a rare sparkle in her eyes. "It's a big night for Marcus," she said, almost girlishly. "He's been so tense lately. This will be good for him." Downstairs, the house was filling with the sounds of orchestral tuning and clinking glasses. The air grew thick with the scent of expensive perfume and anticipation. I moved through the throng of caterers and staff, invisible in my black and white uniform, a deadly secret tucked into the hidden pocket of my skirt. It was a small, sleek data drive, no larger than my thumbnail, but its contents were more destructive than any bomb. A week before the gala, Alejandro came to me, his presence in my small, tidy cottage, an intrusion of the world I had worked so hard to leave behind. He stood by the fireplace, unable to fully meet my gaze, an awkward mix of guilt and obligation etched onto his familiar features. "He told me Marcus insisted I attend," he explained, his voice a low, uncomfortable murmur about presenting a united family front to the public. The irony was a sharp, cold needle in my heart. After all these years, Marcus Thorne still saw me as a prop. A simple old woman he could trot out when the script demanded a touch of humble, familial grace, a piece of set dressing to make his cold empire look like a home. I agreed with a quiet, subservient nod, the same nod I'd perfected over decades of service. "Of course, Mr. Alejandro," I'd said, my voice a wisp of acquiescence. "Whatever Mr. Thorne requires," but this time the script had been rewritten. This time, I would be the one holding all the cards. The days that followed were a study in controlled chaos. While the main house erupted into a frenzy of preparation florists arriving with impossible arrangements, a team of men hanging lights in the ancient oaks that lined the drive moved through my own private preparations. The data drive, my tiny sliver of vengeance, was a constant, cool weight against my thigh, sewn into a hidden pocket of my plainest skirt. I would touch it sometimes, a secret benediction, my fingers tracing its outline as I watched the circus unfold from my kitchen window. I practiced my role. I was the grateful, slightly overwhelmed old retainer, honored to be included in such a grand affair. I let Eleanor fret over my dress, a simple, outdated black sheath she produced from some forgotten closet. Clucking her tongue about how I'd let myself go, I accepted her emerald necklace on the night of the gala with trembling, performative hands, my eyes wide with a feigned awe at its cold, green fire. She was so close, smelling of rosewater and privilege, her mind already halfway to the ballroom, to her husband's side. For a fleeting second in the mirror, I saw a flicker of the friend she used to be, the one who would have seen right through Marcus's bluster. Then the moment passed, and the placid wife returned. It will be a night no one will ever forget, I told her, and the truth of the statement was a bitter pill on my tongue. Downstairs, the house was a living, breathing creature of sound and scent. I moved through the throng of guests, a ghost in my servant's uniform, invisible, a piece of the well-oiled machinery that made the Thorn world turn. As I carried empty glasses on a tray, my eyes and ears absorbed everything, the cloying sweetness of expensive perfume that had replaced the stale air of secrets, the sharp, clean tang of champagne. The low hum of polished conversation punctuated by artificial laughter and the delicate clinking of crystal. I saw him then, Marcus Thorn, pausing at the top of the grand staircase, a king surveying his domain. He had reassembled his public mask with meticulous care. The tuxedo was a sculptor's masterpiece, the smile a practiced, confident curve. He looked every inch the Titan, the self-made man who had conquered everything in his path. But I had spent a lifetime learning the subtle language of his face. I could see the fine, almost imperceptible sheen of sweat on his temple, the unnatural tightness at the corners of his eyes that betrayed the strain. He was playing his part, a performance of power and ease for the adoring crowd below, and I was playing mine. I was the servant, the quiet woman with the feather duster, the one who knew where all the bodies were buried because I'd helped sweep the dirt over them. The hum of the crowd was a rising wave of adulation, crashing against the marble steps at his feet. But beneath that wave, I was the current, cold, patient, and relentless, pulling him toward the abyss. My fingers brushed against the hidden pocket, feeling the hard, sleek shape of the data drive. It was time. The master of the house was about to take his final bow. The night of the gala arrived. As we walked in, Alondro leaned in and whispered, "Mama, maybe you can enjoy the beautiful garden area. It's quieter out there." I just nodded meekly. He was relieved. What he didn't know was that my quiet compliance was my final move. It gave me the freedom to move through the event unnoticed. He melted into the crowd, his own mask of charming ambition firmly in place. And I was left alone, a ghost in a simple black dress. I drifted towards the French doors, leading to the garden, a placid smile on my face for anyone who might glance my way. But I didn't step outside. Instead, I turned, blending into the periphery of the grand ballroom, a piece of the well-oiled machinery that made the Thorn world turn. I moved along the edges, my eyes absorbing everything. The air, once stale with secrets, had grown thick with the cloying sweetness of expensive perfume and the sharp, clean temps of champagne. The low hum of polished conversation was punctuated by the occasional burst of artificial laughter and the delicate clinking of crystal. I was invisible here, just the mother of the up-and-coming protege, a harmless, fading accessory. Then I saw him, Marcus Thorn, pausing at the top of the grand staircase, a king surveying his domain. He had reassembled his public mask with meticulous care. The tuxedo was a sculptor's masterpiece. The smile a practiced, confident curve. He looked every inch the Titan, the self-made man who had conquered everything in his path. But I had spent a lifetime learning the subtle language of his face. I could see the fine, almost imperceptible sheen of sweat on his temple, the unnatural tightness at the corners of his eyes that betrayed the strain. He was playing his part, a performance of power and ease for the adoring crowd below. And I was playing mine. I was the servant, the quiet woman with the feather duster. The one who knew where all the bodies were buried because I'd helped sweep the dirt over them. The hum of the crowd was a rising wave of adulation, crashing against the marble steps at his feet. But beneath that wave, I was the current, cold, patient, and relentless, pulling him toward the abyss. My fingers brushed against the hidden seam of my dress, feeling the hard, sleek shape of the data drive. It was time. The master of the house was about to take his final bow. I began my slow, deliberate circuit of the room, a silent orbit around the gravitational pull of Marcus's presence. I passed a server carrying a tray of empty flutes and, with a murmured permiso, I took the tray from her. Her look of surprise was brief, replaced by a shrug of gratitude as she moved on to another task. Now, I had a purpose, a prop. I was no longer just a guest's mother. I was part of the staff, utterly beneath notice. The weight of the tray in my hands was familiar, a ghost of a sensation from 1,000 other nights spent in servitude. Not just to him, but to the life he'd forced upon us. I weaved through the throng, collecting empty glasses with a downcast gaze. I saw Alejandro near the bar, laughing too loudly at something one of Marcus's lieutenants said, his eyes bright with a desperate hunger. My heart ached for a moment, a sharp, maternal pang. He was so close to the flame, believing he was made of asbestos. He didn't know he was about to be burned by the inferno I was about to unleash. My path took me toward the east wall, where a massive, floor-to-ceiling tapestry depicting some mythological conquest hung. It was my landmark. Behind its woven heroes and fallen enemies was a small, discreet door that led to the service corridors, the arteries of the house. Javier would be waiting in the shadows there, his phone ready, his own heart pounding a rhythm of vengeance that matched my own. Marcus had begun his descent, shaking hands, bestowing smiles that didn't reach his eyes. He was moving toward the podium, where a microphone stood waiting for his annual speech, a litany of his own greatness. Each step he took down the staircase was a tick of the clock. The air tightened. My palms were dry, my breath even. This was the calm I had cultivated for 20 years. I reached the tapestry, its threads coarse under my fingertips as I pretended to adjust its hang. I set the tray of empty glasses down on a small, marble-topped console beside it. The clink of crystal was lost in the din. With my body shielding the movement from the room, I slipped my hand into my hidden pocket and retrieved the data drive. It was warm from my skin, a little sliver of condensed truth. Leaning forward as if to examine the tapestry's craftsmanship, I let my arm fall casually to my side. The drive cradled in my palm. I felt, rather than saw, the subtle shift in the darkness behind the fabric. A hand, calloused and familiar, brushed against mine. The transfer was instantaneous, silent. The weight was gone from my hand, and with it, the last of my hesitation. I didn't look back. I picked up my tray and continued my journey, moving away from the tapestry, away from Javier, and toward the French doors. This time, I did step out into the garden. The cool night air was a shock, a baptism. In the distance, the city lights twinkled, indifferent. From inside, I heard the feedback squeal of a microphone being tapped. Then, the smooth, confident baritone of Marcus Thorne beginning his speech. I stood in the fragrant darkness, a meek woman enjoying the quiet, and waited for the world to crack open. A collective gasp swept through the room. It was a sound I had imagined 1,000 times, but its reality was far more portentous sharp. Unified intake of breath that sucked all the air and noise from the grand ballroom, leaving only a vacuum of stunned silence. Then, the silence broke. It wasn't with shouts, not at first. It was a low, rising wave of murmurs, of confusion, of chairs scraping back as people leaned forward, squinting at the colossal screens as if they couldn't trust their own eyes. Marcus Thorne, mid-sentence about prosperity, faltered a smile. That carefully constructed monument of confidence didn't so much fall as it calcified on his face. He turned, a slow, ponderous movement of a man who already knows the monster waiting for him. I saw the exact moment he understood. His shoulders, always held so square and imposing, gave a barely perceptible slump. Then they stiffened again, rigid with fury. He spun back to the crowd, his hand gripping the microphone stand, his knuckles white. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, his voice cracking with a strain I had never heard before. A malicious hack. A lie. It was his personal stationery on a letter authorizing the transfer of pension funds. It was a scanned page from a leather-bound journal I'd seen on his desk, with his own handwriting detailing the plan to let Alexander's signature authorize the catastrophic final transaction. It was a photograph of him with a man Interpol had been searching for, taken on a fishing trip in the Caymans. The room was no longer his. The spell was broken. The adoring crowd was now a pack of wolves, their loyalty evaporating in the heat of their own potential ruin. I saw Alexander first, his face a pale moon of confusion. He looked from the screens to his father, his mouth slightly agape, a boy searching for a cue from his hero on how to react. Then, as a particularly damning email flashed up, one where Marcus coldly referred to his own son as the perfect, gullible scapegoat, Alexander's expression shattered. The confusion melted into a hurt so profound it was physical, his body recoiling as if struck. He looked at his father not as a patriarch, but as a predator. That was my victory. Not the public shaming, not the corporate implosion, but that single, silent moment of my son's disillusionment. It was the antidote to 20 years of poison. My work, however, was not quite done. I had to be seen. I had to be the meek, frightened wife. As the murmurs escalated into shouts of "Explain this, Marcus, and my investment," I let my tray clatter to the floor. The shattering crystal was a tiny, insignificant sound in the chaos, but it drew the eyes of those immediately around me. I brought a trembling hand to my mouth, my eyes wide, with what I hoped looked like horrified shock. "Marcus," I whispered, the name catching in my throat. What is this?" From inside, the noise was no longer a unified gasp, but a cacophony of angry voices, the shrill call of someone demanding security, and beneath it all, the relentless, silent testimony of the data still flashing on the screens. I didn't look back at the chaos. I looked forward into the darkness of the manicured hedges. A figure detached itself from the shadows. Javier. He moved with a swift, fluid grace, his tuxedo making him just another guest seeking air. He didn't speak. He simply fell into step beside me, our path taking us along a gravel walkway that curved away from the house, toward the service gate. The sound of our footsteps was swallowed by the rising din from the ballroom. "We are clear," I asked, my voice low and steady now, all pretense of weakness gone. "The technician is already in a car, miles away," Javier replied, his voice a low rumble. "The data stream is on a loop and is being broadcast to 3 major news networks. It cannot be stopped. The crack, as you said, has become a chasm. Every calculated step, every suppressed flinch, every silent scream over 2 decades had led to this quiet exit. It is done, then," I said, more to myself than to him. Javier opened the car door for me. "It is just beginning, Isabella." The world had cracked open, and through the fissure I had finally escaped. The meek wife was gone, and in her place, the architect of ruin settled in for the long drive into whatever came next. The word hung in the air, a desperate plea swallowed by chaos. "Mama," it was a word she hadn't heard from his lips in years. He knelt on the polished marble, a prince of ruin brought low. The crowd was a roiling sea of shock around their little island of stillness. She looked down at him and felt nothing but hollow, clean sensation, like a wound cauterized and finally numb. The crowd was a roiling sea of shock and panic around our little island of stillness. Guests shoved past each other, their masks of civility shattered, their phones held aloft not to capture a glamorous spectacle, but a historic downfall. The screens still glowed, a silent, damning chorus, repeating my affidavit, my name, my face. "Elena Morales. Lead investigator, not just a mother, never just a mother." I looked down at him, at the perfect part in his dark hair. So like his father's. I felt nothing. Not triumph, not pity. It was a hollow, clean sensation, like a wound cauterized and finally numb. The sirens, which had been a distant promise, were now screaming at the gates, their blue and red lights painting the opulent walls in strokes of urgent color. Mercy, Alejandro whispered again, his voice cracking. They'll destroy me. There is a difference. Did you think I forgot how to read the one you and your father were writing for our country? Another pair came for Alejandro. He flinched as a hand settled on his shoulder. He looked at me, a child's raw panic in a man's face. Mama, please, tell Tim Ju lied. I knelt then, bringing my eyes level with his. The move was so unexpected it silenced his pleas. I was close enough to see the faint scar on his chin from a childhood fall from a tree, a memory of a boy who was brave, not cruel. I am showing you mercy, I said, my voice so low only he could hear it. The mercy of truth, the mercy of stopping you before you, became so entrenched in his poison that there was no coming back. You will go to a white-walled cell, not a gilded one. You will answer for your crimes, not be celebrated for them. That is the only gift I have left to give you. The crowd parted for me once more, their stares now a mixture of fear and awe. I was no longer just the betrayed wife or the embarrassing mother. I was the woman who had held the match to the dynasty and watched it burn. I walked out the main doors, the cool night air a balm after the heated stench of panic and perfume. Parked at the bottom of the grand staircase, right where the valets had been scrambling hours before, was the same nondescript sedan. Javier leaned against the driver's side door, his tuxedo jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up. He didn't smile, he simply opened the passenger door. I slid inside. The scent of cool leather and clean car was a universe away from the cloying opulence of the mansion. As Javier got in and started the engine, I looked back one last time. Alejandro was being led out, his hands secured behind his back, his father following in a similar state. The flashing lights illuminated their shame for the entire world to see. Javier pulled away, the mansion shrinking in the rearview mirror, a gilded cage growing smaller and smaller until it was just a speck of light, and then nothing. He said, "Please," I said quietly, staring at the dark, unspooling road ahead. Javier glanced at me, and the numbness was beginning to recede, and in its place was a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Where are we going? And the free woman, for the first time in over 2 decades, was finally, truly going home. Whatever that was, she looked down at her son, seeing the man he had become rather than the child she remembered. The mercy he was begging for was the same mercy he had denied her for 22 years. Federal agents stormed the ballroom, their grim efficiency drowning out the remnants of the string quartet. I saw Marcus Thorne first, his face a thundercloud of outraged privilege. He sputtered about his lawyers, about connections, about a profound misunderstanding, but the steel cuffs closing around his wrists were the only truth that mattered. His eyes, wild and searching, found mine across the chaos. For a fleeting second, I saw the ghost of the young man who had charmed me, the one who promised a life of security and love. Then the ghost vanished, replaced by the cold, hard understanding of the architect of his ruin. I did not look away. I let him see the quiet woman from the kitchen, the one who had been taking notes for years. Then they took Alejandro. 2 agents, a man and a woman, guided him with a firm, impersonal grip. His bespoke tuxedo, a garment that cost more than most people's cars, was now rumpled and stained with spilled champagne. The perfect gelled hair was a mess. But it was his face that held me captive. It was stained not with tears of remorse, but of self-pity, the confused, wounded expression of a boy who'd had his favorite toy taken away and couldn't comprehend why. He didn't look at me again. He couldn't bear to see the source of his undoing, the foundation of his world revealing itself to be a fault line. My revenge was not loud or explosive. It was a quiet, precise dismantling of a world built on arrogance and disrespect. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut, of a stock price plummeting, of a reputation turning to dust. It was the absence of a comforting word, the withdrawal of the silent support they had all taken for granted. Justice had been served, not just for the thousands of people they planned to defraud with their hollow real estate empire, but for the quiet, invisible woman they thought they could hide in the kitchen. Her spirit slowly suffocating under layers of gilded wallpaper and condescending smiles. The flashes of cameras painted the scene in stark, intermittent bursts of white. Each pop was a nail in the coffin of the Thorne dynasty. I saw a photographer crouch low to capture Alejandro's tear-streaked face as he was led down the grand staircase, a perverse inversion of his grand entrance hours before. I hoped the picture would be on the front page. I hoped his fraternity brothers would see it. I hoped the society girls who'd always looked past me would understand that the foundation of their world was rotten and that I was the one who had finally called in the inspectors. As the last of the commotion faded, replaced by an eerie, echoing silence, a single figure remained. It was Isabella, Marcus's ancient, razor-spined aunt. She had not fled with the others. She stood by the shattered remains of the ice sculpture, a crystal glass of whiskey in her hand, untouched. Her eyes, sharp and black as obsidian, met mine. There was no condemnation in them, no praise either, just a weary, ancient acknowledgement. She gave me the faintest nod, a queen conceding to the one who had successfully stormed the castle. Then she turned and walked slowly towards the library, a relic retreating into the ruins. She, perhaps, was the only one who had ever suspected the steel that lay beneath my soft, compliant exterior. I turned my back on the wreckage of the ballroom. My heels clicked a final, solitary rhythm on the marble floor, a sound I would never have to hear again. I walked out the main doors, the cool night air a balm after the heated stench of panic and expensive perfume. Parked at the bottom of the grand staircase, right where the valets had been scrambling hours before, was the same nondescript sedan. Javier leaned against the driver's side door, his tuxedo jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up. He didn't smile. He simply opened the passenger door. I slid inside. The scent of cool leather and clean car was a universe away from the cloying opulence of the mansion. As Javier got in and started the engine, I looked back one last time. Alejandro was being led out, his hands secured behind his back, his father following in a similar state. The flashing lights illuminated their shame for the entire world to see. Javier pulled away, the mansion shrinking in the rearview mirror, a gilded cage growing smaller and smaller until it was just a speck of light, and then nothing. He said, "Please," I said quietly, staring at the dark, unspooling road ahead. The word hung in the air between us, so small and yet so heavy with everything it represented. Javier glanced at me, and there were 1,000 things I could have said, a lifetime of words I had swallowed. But in that moment, facing my broken son, all of them felt like stones that would only bury us both deeper. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. The numbness was beginning to recede, and in its place was a profound, bone-deep exhaustion that felt older than I was. Where are we going? The architect of ruin was tired, her blueprints finally realized, and the free woman, for the first time in over 2 decades, was finally, truly, going home. Whatever that was, the road ahead was dark, but it was my road, and for now, the simple, profound act of moving forward was enough. The hum of the computer was a quiet, steady sound, a far cry from the orchestral swells of my old life. Sunlight streamed into the small office of my new pro bono consultancy firm. I had reclaimed my name, Elena Morales. My accent was still there, but now when I spoke, people listened to the words themselves, not the delivery. The hum of the computer was a quiet, steady sound, a far cry from the orchestral swells of my old life. Sunlight streamed into the small office where I had reclaimed my name, Elena Morales. My accent was still there, a melodic trace of a life I'd left behind. But now when I spoke, people listened to the words themselves, not the delivery. They leaned in, their eyes focused not on the jewelry I wore or the designer label of my dress, but on the hard-won knowledge behind them. My current client, a young woman named Maria, clutched a thick folder of documents to her chest. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and hope, reminded me of my own reflection in the gilded mirrors of the mansion. A predatory loan from a subsidiary of one of Alejandro's old business partners was threatening to swallow her family's bakery whole. They said the terms were standard, she whispered, her knuckles white. But the fees, they appear out of nowhere. Their confusion ends here. At this desk, Javier, who had become my steadfast friend and the firm's part-time security consultant, kept a discreet ear to the ground. Alejandro took a plea deal, his grand future reduced to a cautionary tale whispered in country clubs and boardrooms. His empire, built on secrets and leverage, had proven as fragile as glass. I felt no triumph in the news, only a quiet, final click, like a lock turning on a door I would never have to open again. My peace was not found in his downfall, but in my own resurrection. It was in the simple ritual of making my own coffee, in choosing my own clothes, soft linens and simple cottons that felt like a second skin. It was in the quiet evenings in my small, book-filled apartment where the only ghost was the scent of jasmine from the plant on my balcony. The phone on my desk buzzed, a soft, internal line. It was Javier. "Your 1 o'clock is here," he said, his voice a low, familiar rumble through the speaker. "A Mr. Davies. Says it's about a retirement fund." He introduced himself as Arthur Davies, a retired foreman from a manufacturing plant. "They merged, you see," he explained, his hands resting on his knees, gripping them tightly. "The new parent company, Sterling Holdings. They said our pension plan was being restructured. After 40 years, my pension is half of what I was promised. My wife, her medications." I saw the ghost of my own father, a man who had worked himself into the ground for a company that would have forgotten his name a week after his funeral. A familiar, cold anger, one I had learned to channel into focus, began to burn in my chest. "Sterling Holdings," I repeated, the name tasting like ash. It was a company Alejandro had often golfed with, a faceless entity he'd praised for its ruthless efficiency. I pulled a fresh legal pad toward me. "Mr. Davies, let's start from the beginning. Tell me everything." And this, I realized as I listened, was part of that respect. It was the knowledge I'd gained in that gilded cage to dismantle, piece by piece, the very machines that built them. The meek wife was gone, her ashes scattered. The architect of ruin was retired, but the defender, the advocate, she was just getting started. The road ahead was no longer dark, but illuminated by the clear, honest light of a new day, and the profound satisfaction of moving forward with purpose.